Welcome to Technically ITF. This time I want to address something that there's a misconception, or because there are different ITF groups, sometimes we do things differently, and that's okay. But especially when we do sine wave, when the sine wave came to be, the sine wave didn't come to exchange anything that theater power had already. When doing power, when creating power, is that we used to use our hips. And sometimes some practitioners don't use the hip because they're using sine wave. And also I've heard that because we're doing sine wave now, we don't need the jerk of our hip anymore. And that's not the case, especially when we do techniques that are sideways. For example, if I'm doing chonji, the first movement of chonji, we don't turn and do the block because we're doing sine wave. Yes, the sine wave will allow us to add the mass going down into the block, but because it's a side block, we can use our hips as well. So you need to use the hip plus the sine wave, because the sine wave is adding power, adding motion power to the technique. So before the sine wave, we just use the hip, right? Then the sine wave came to be, and some people just use the sine wave and no hip. We need to use both, because the sine wave will give you the momentum. It will get the mass up before going down. But the hip is actually while blocking. The sine wave is more the path while you're going to the block. But when you're blocking, the actual block has to be with the hip jerk. So I prefer doing the sine wave, and now the last part of the sine wave, the third part of the sine wave, first going down, then up. When going down, I don't do anything until the very last moment, and I use my hip to add more power into that block. And we can do that with many techniques. For example, the middle, the inner forearm block, middle section. So just hip, there's power there, just sine wave, there's mass into it, but both sine wave first, then at the end, hip rotation. There you have more power, combining both. What sine wave do is prepare yourself in a more relaxed way, that from here, just from 0 to 100 speed, the sine wave will give you that relaxation before doing the actual speeding. And then at the moment of the impact, I'm gonna jerk my hip. Okay? Now there are techniques that are straightforward, like the front punch or upper punch. And I've been taught not to use the hip for anything, nothing at all. Just from here, just pure sine wave. No hip at all. And while the reasoning behind of it makes sense, it doesn't change the vision that General Che always taught. We need, for example, our hip goes to the sides, right? So of course, I'm not gonna jerk my hip too much to my sides because my technique is going forward. That's understandable. But either way, this hip has to go to the opposite direction where the punch is going. So if my punch is in this side, my punch is going forward, this side has to go backwards. And you might think, oh, but you have the reaction hand going backwards. Yes, that's the hand, but the body is going forward. So one thing is the reaction hand that is reacting to the actual technique hand, but the body is going forward. So there's nothing pulling the body back into place, and it's not pulling the mass away of the technique. It's pulling the mass in position, in balance, so the technique can be properly aligned. Because otherwise, if you don't pull your hip back, you're gonna end up like this, and you should be like this, full facing, not like this. So if I punch with all my might like this is normal, like half facing. But when I pull my hip back there, and then I land on the spot more balanced, and I have the reaction hand for my technique hand, and I have my reaction hip for my foot going forward, put it into place, and you have more balance. And remember, theater power one of the items of the theory of power is balance. You need to be balanced. If you don't put that hip back, you will lack of balance because everything will go forward, and that's not the case. Something has to go back to give you more balance. Okay? So I'm discussing this because I see it many times worldwide, and I'm not saying that a punch with the hip will be more powerful, putting the hip backwards, than not doing it. I'm not gonna get into that, but what I want to concentrate this time is what General Che wanted. General Che always wanted it, to have that jerk motion. And the book says that you need to use your knee spring, your rotation, the torque, rotation here. Remember, especially when we do hand techniques, the hand that is not doing a technique is the one that takes care as a reaction hand of the technique hand. But the body is something else. The steps we're doing, we cannot just do a step without having a counterbalance. And that's where the hip jerk comes in. Same as fingertip thrust, flat fingertip thrust. If I don't go back, I do this, my hip will go forward because all my mass is going forward. And this one is going back. And this is what I'm gonna do. This. So I need this hip, do this. In counterpart with this. So if I do it sideways, it's not the same doing this as doing this. Okay? So hope it gets clear to some of you. If you have any doubt, let me know. If you have other suggestions, let me know. What we want to do is to emphasize what General Che wanted and how can we preserve what General Che taught and how we can imply that nowadays that we have so many organizations and so many variations of the same technique. Doing the same technique with many variations can be confusing to many newcomers. But remember, the book is there, and many General Che's seminars, videos are out there as well for you to see. But it's important to keep the legacy alive, and it's our job, instructors, to do that. So thank you for watching. See you next time.